So just because I brought up Eric and you're on Twitter, I'd love to hear your opinions. I talk to him a lot. He seems to have stepped into the beautiful dance of human communication and the social dynamics that is the Bitcoin cryptocurrency community. Do you have thoughts on gauge theoretic conceptualization of the world, or just Eric in general? He's got a lot of love in his heart, and he's got grace in the way he communicates. But he's also loves to play with ideas and seems to have touched a sensitive point with the Bitcoin community. Is there anything you could say that's hopeful, inspiring about that whole dynamic that went down?
So I don't know all of the details, but what I will say is I've listened to a number of his podcasts, and him, and there's a whole bunch of people like him. I basically put them in the bucket of they're an independent thinker who are courageous enough to speak their truth, whatever that may be. They are humble enough to revisit their ideas and say, I got this right, I got this wrong, information changed, I'll change my mind. It's obviously a sign of intelligence to be able to do that type of stuff. And I actually think that one of the most scarce things in our society are those independent thinkers who are able to do all this, right?
Yeah. Speaking of scarcity, yeah.
And so to me, I put Eric and the whole host of other people kind of, if you look at like the intellectual dark web is kind of a label that's been used, they're actually some of the most important people in our society because they're the people who are willing to stand up against the mass kind of thought process. They're willing to talk about things that others may think are taboo, right? They're willing to change their mind, which all of a sudden has become a bad thing rather than a good thing. And so when I see the exploration of ideas in public, I actually think that those are the people who are most open to the kind of vehement blowback as well. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's part of what they're doing is that they're eliciting, hey, I'm going to throw an idea into the arena. If it doesn't get attacked, they actually may be more nervous than if there is some level of, kind of war of attrition, if you will. And so what I've seen with a number of the people who have done this, everyone from some of the best, hedge fund managers and kind of money managers in the world, all the way to what I'll consider some of the most intellectual people in the world, is they play with these ideas and they play with the ideas and they play with them and they play with them. Mm-hmm. And they all arrive at the same conclusion. And sometimes it takes a month, sometimes it takes years, but they arrive at this Bitcoin thesis. And what's so interesting about it is it highlights something that many people view as a bug, but I think people in the Bitcoin community view as a feature, which is that community. And so what ends up happening is when you have something that is as ambitious as creating a global reserve currency, doesn't mean it needs to unseat any of the existing ones, but become the global reserve currency of the internet, right? This digital economy. You need shepherds of it. Mm-hmm. And so just like a technology company wants to find those loyal fans that are willing to go out and market and word of mouth and kind of not only promote it, but also protect it, this technology that is this decentralized thing, which uses a financial incentive in order to elicit the buy-in, not from a financial perspective, but from a mental energy standpoint, has built one of the most rabid, powerful, and engaged communities on the internet. Mm-hmm. And what ends up happening is those people have thought more about these ideas and actually challenged those ideas more than anyone else in the world. And so I've got a lot of folks who will just say, there's this guy, Marty Bent, who will talk all the time about the Bitcoin critics haven't done their homework in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. So they show up and sometimes it's super intellectual, lazy arguments. Sometimes it's actually very well thought out arguments, on the counter to the Bitcoin thesis. But ultimately what ends up happening is you're talking to somebody who's an expert. They've been thinking about this for 5, 7, 8, 10 years, right? They've gone through every simulation you possibly can. And they show up with data, examples, and responses. Now, they're not always right, but they've just done the work. And so what I actually like about folks like Eric and others is as they're kind of going through this journey, they're incredibly smart, right? And they provide or they apply a lot of intellectual rigor mm-hmm. to some of these arguments. And so what it does is, what does it do? It's a marketplace. It keeps people honest.
Yeah. So let me sort of make a few comments. It's kind of interesting. So you're exactly right. Maybe the blowback is part of the mechanism that actually develops these ideas and so on. I do want to kind of speak to a little bit of the toxicity that I've experienced in the Bitcoin community. I kind of see it the Bitcoin community, I think you paint a really nice picture, which I kind of see it as an immune system that protects against sort of the viruses that are bad ideas. That said, the immune system can destroy a body, right? And the thing you mentioned about Eric and maybe about myself, and in general, just people exploring ideas, is there is a Dunning-Kruger effect, which is when you first start exploring ideas deeply, you have overblown level of confidence about like how much you understand, and that's actually the process about learning. Then you realize you don't understand much. What I've noticed with the Bitcoin community is they're not as patient with the basics of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like if I step in and make declarative statements about Bitcoin. Like I read a long time ago the white paper. Like at the cursory level, I felt that I understand the technology. This is basic intuitions. I didn't think about the social dynamics. I didn't think about any like financial implications and a lot of the the ongoing innovations and all that kind of stuff. But I thought I understood that technology, and so I step in and make declarative statements. I think those are the first time you say, okay, what's the role of Bitcoin in the world? You start thinking about it deeply, and then you make statements. The toxicity that you get in those first few statements is really off-putting to me. I'm somebody that tries to communicate love and live that with everything I do. And there is a level of disrespect that I've experienced, not directly, just observing others. People have been mostly kind to me, and I appreciate that. But if you're going to criticize me about my exploration of ideas in Bitcoin, you have to also acknowledge that I'm a human being that got like a PhD in stuff. Like I did some hard shit that it could be in farming or it could be in whatever. Like I've lived life and I've really thought deeply and I really care. Like I know a lot of shit, and it's possible that I actually have a lot of ideas that you can learn from. Now, if it's agriculture, fine, or if it's artificial intelligence, fine. Like I know what I'm talking about certain things, and I could be wrong about a lot of things. And there's like an exchange of ideas that makes that mechanism that you talked about more efficient. Sometimes when the blowback is too strong too early on, the development of ideas is just inefficient. And I'm not sure if there's the way it was explained to me is that for so long that community was like bombarded with just like bad ideas, like criticisms. They're just overly sensitive now to like to bullshit. They're like triggered by statements. Like they've heard it all before, and they're like, oh, there they go again with the same old arguments. But that doesn't mean that you have to sort of, I guess, develop patience and so on, especially when you feel like in my case that the person is coming from a good place, right? I don't know if there's something you could say that's positive about the future of this kind of overcoming this toxicity.
I think there's a couple of trends that are all kind of coalescing here, right, in these types of experiences. So one is when you look at a community, there's always a spectrum, right, in terms of there's some people who over-index on kindness and stupidity, right, and there's some people who over-index on intelligence and basically just being an asshole, right, and then you get everyone in between. And so like naturally, as we know, the extremist ends of any community end up being the loudest usually, right? The second thing is there is, from the outsider view, at the beginning of the exploration of ideas, it's very much a learning process, right? It's I don't know if I understand this or not, but here's ideas A, B, and C. From the internal perspective, there's $1 trillion of value at stake, and we must protect it with our lives.
Yeah.
Right? The truth probably somewhere in between there, right? And again, the world's not black and white. There's this kind of more gray area that I think actually is where most people exist. The other thing that's at play here is I think the Bitcoin community understands the internet and internet culture and narratives better than almost anyone.
Yes.
And so you see this with kind of the just complete destruction of narratives with memes and just the visceral reaction and the use of things like Reddit and Twitter and YouTube, podcasts, just areas where I think a lot about if you are an upstart, right? And you are going to go challenge the most well-respected, elite kind of establishment institutions in the world. If you walk in a suit and tie and you say, I'm here to debate you with ideas, you're going to get your clock cleaned,
Yeah.
right? Because they're going to trot out their lawyers, their regulators, their lobbyists, right? Like all this stuff. If you instead say, I'm going to meme you to death on the internet and I'm going to control the public narrative.
You've shifted the power, the asymmetry of power is more symmetrical now.
It's the ultimate insurgency, right? If you bring it back to the battlefield. Yes. Yeah. And so when you think about this, you have to lean into the advantage that you have.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is you and I would absolutely lose it if we saw JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or the Federal Reserve start tweeting memes.
Yeah.
Right. It would almost the validation it would give to the medium and the even playing field that it would provide would pull these establishments down to the level of what is this upstart. But now what you're starting to see is that the Bitcoin community, even though there's some level of toxicity at times, even though there's this visceral reaction, sometimes there's even what I would call bullying or kind of outward projection of things, right? Even though it may be a small percentage, it'll happen every once in a while. What they do understand, though, is that these establishments are made up of humans. And what you can actually do, one of the best ways to pick apart an institution is to recruit from inside of them one by one.
Yes.
And so what you're starting to see now is, I get the messages on Twitter and LinkedIn all the time. Yeah. Hey, I'm a banker by trade, but I'm a Bitcoiner at heart, right? And so what you're doing is you're essentially infiltrating the organizations, not in physical, population, but with the ideas and with the philosophies.
Banker in the streets, Bitcoiner in the sheets. Yeah. Okay. I like it. That said, in terms of shit posting and memes, I gotta say, bring it on, because I believe, in terms of asymmetry of power, I believe in that love will save the world, not memes, or at least good vibe memes as opposed to shit posting. It's an interesting battleground, though. It's an interesting battleground to think about.
The other thing I would say too is one of the elements that's always kind of funny to me is how much of the entertainment is love, right? So when you start to think about how many of the memes that are posted, for example, are for outsiders versus insiders.
Yes.
Laser eyes, right? Which seems absolutely ridiculous, elementary, and frankly, beneath anyone in any level of power or influence in the world. Somehow has congressmen and senators who have done it.
Yeah.
They're not trying to convince their colleagues in elected positions to become Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
They're speaking directly internally to the Bitcoin community.
Yeah, there's some sense in which, yes, memes is love. Even I keep hearing Bitcoin is love. They're trying to convert me.
The one that you have to laugh at, right? Yeah. Probably my favorite one out of all of it is I've seen on multiple occasions. Mark Cuban a couple of years ago, Kevin O'Leary, whoever, wealthy people, billionaires, etc. And you have people on anonymous accounts who knows who they are, telling them have fun staying poor, right? And it's just it's just again part of a community, and I think it's a feature, not a bug. There's bad aspects to it at times, but I do think it's a net positive.
Yeah, just like the immune system. That's all. It does a lot of crappy stuff, but overall, it's a major net positive.